There is a man standing at the edge of a village, just past the last house, where the lamplight stops and the dark begins. He has been standing in places like this for years, close enough to hear the sounds of dinner, far enough that no one has to look at him. He remembers the exact texture of certain things, the weight of a child on his shoulders, the grip of a friend's hand on his forearm, the warmth of another person leaning against him in the cold. He remembers these things the way you remember a language you no longer speak, because the law does not allow him to touch or be touched ever again. When someone walks toward him on the road, he does not smile. He does not wave. He lifts what is left of his voice and says the one word that ends every conversation before it begins: unclean. And they cross to the other side, and they hurry, and he watches them go, and this is his life. Not the sickness on his skin, the distance. The sickness he could almost live with. Themselves, it is the years without a single hand that are killing him. Now, to understand what is about to happen to this man, you have to understand something about the world he lived in. In the ancient world, there was a law, and it worked with the certainty of gravity. When something clean touched something unclean, the clean thing did not stay clean. It lost, every time. A priest could not touch a corpse. A healthy person could not touch a sick one. Contact ran in one direction only, from the pure to the impure, and the pure was always the one that paid. For 1,000 years, there were no exceptions to this, not one. It was not a rule people chose to follow. It was simply how the world was believed to work, the way water runs downhill and never up. Until one afternoon, on a dusty road in Galilee, a hand reached out in the wrong direction, and clean did not lose. And then it happened again, and the last time it happened, the hand doing the touching belonged to a man who had been dead for 3 days. This is not a story about magic. This is not a story about medicine. This is not a story about a man who broke the rules and got lucky. This is something stranger and quieter and far more disturbing to the people who watched it happen. Because they realized they were not watching a law get broken. They were watching it run backward. We are going to line them up today. Every recorded time someone touched Jesus or he touched them, and everything changed. And we are going to find the single pattern hiding underneath all of them. A pattern almost nobody notices until you see all the stories side by side. And by the time we reach the end, the last touch in this video, I promise you will never read a single one of these stories the same way again. Let's start with the man at the edge of the village. His name is not recorded. That tells you something all by itself. He had a family once, probably, neighbors who knew his face. But by the time he walks into this story, he is not a name anymore. He is a condition, the leper. That is all anyone sees. The law required him to live outside the town. It required him to wear torn clothes, to leave his hair unkempt, and to cover his upper lip. And whenever another person came near, it required him to become his own alarm system, to call out that word, unclean, unclean, so that the healthy could keep their distance. Imagine doing that for a year. Imagine doing it for 10. Imagine what it does to a person to be legally required to announce every single day that you are the thing others must avoid. And then he hears about a teacher. And he does something no leper is ever supposed to do. He walks toward the crowd instead of away from it. He comes and falls on his knees and says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Watch that word, clean. He doesn't say, "You can cure my skin." He says, "You can make me clean." He wants his body back, yes, but more than that, he wants back in. He wants to be touchable again. And here the Gospel of Mark gives us a detail that most people read straight past. It says Jesus was moved with compassion. The Greek word underneath that phrase is esplankniste, and it does not mean he felt a little sorry. It comes from the word for the gut, the depth inner places. It means something turned over inside him. It means he felt this man's isolation in his own body. And then comes the line that should not be possible. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. Stop there. Because everyone in that crowd just held their breath. Under the law, that touch was a catastrophe. Jesus should now be unclean. The infection of impurity should be climbing up his arm at this very moment. That is how the world worked. That is how it had always worked. And notice the order Mark gives us. Jesus touches him first, and then says, "I am willing, be clean." The touch comes before the healing. For one heartbeat, Jesus is holding a man who is still technically a leper. He is not touching a healed man, he is touching a sick one. He reached into the uncleanness before there was anything safe to reach into. The touch itself was the miracle, before the skin ever changed, because for the first time in years this man was not alone. And the uncleanness did not transfer, it went the other way. Wholeness ran down Jesus' arm and into the man, and the disease that no one could touch simply left. Hold on to that, because it is going to happen again and again. Now move forward into a crowd so thick people can barely move. And in that crowd there is a woman, and she has been bleeding for 12 years. You need to understand what that meant. Under the law, a woman with that kind of discharge was continually unclean, not for an evening, for 12 years. Which meant that for 12 years, anything she touched became unclean. Any chair she sat in, any hand she shook, any person she embraced. She could not be a wife in any normal sense. She could not worship at the temple. Mark tells us she had spent everything she had on physicians and had only grown worse. She was broke, she was exhausted, and she was, above all, untouchable. 12 years without a safe embrace. And she has a thought so bold it is almost mad. If I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Not his hand, not even his attention, just the edge of his garment, from behind, where no one will see the untouchable woman doing the unthinkable thing. So she reaches, and the word Mark uses is hapto. It is not a brush of the fingers. It means to grip, to take hold of, to fasten on. She grabs the hem, and instantly the bleeding stops. 12 years stopped in a single second. And then Jesus does the last thing she wanted. He stops walking. He turns around in the middle of that packed crowd and says, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples think it is a ridiculous question. Everyone is touching you. But he is not asking about the crowd. He felt that one grip. He felt wholeness leave him and go into her, and he will not let her slip away as just another anonymous body in the press. She comes forward, trembling, and tells him the whole truth. And here is the thing. She came to steal a healing in secret and disappear. He would not let her stay invisible. He calls her daughter. The only time in the Gospels he calls anyone that word. And he sends her away not just healed, but named and seen and restored to the community that had erased her. Same pattern. The unclean reaches for the clean, and the clean does not lose. Wholeness runs the wrong direction. But before you decide this is only for the desperate and the dramatic, watch him do it for the ordinary too. He walks into Peter's house, and Peter's mother-in-law is down with a fever. No 12-year saga here, just a sick woman in a family home. And Matthew says he touched her hand and the fever left her and she got up and served them. He does not reserve his touch for the spectacular cases. He reaches for the everyday one, the low-grade suffering in a quiet house. And then there are the children. People are bringing their little ones to him, and the disciples try to show them away as if the important man has bigger things to do. And Jesus is genuinely angry about it. He takes them up in his arms, he puts his hands on them, and he blesses them. No disease at all here, no crisis, just the small and the unimportant gathered up and touched. Because in his hands, touch was never only a cure, it was a welcome. That is 3 stories and one pattern already forming. The desperate outcast, the untouchable woman, and the ordinary, the feverish, the small. He reaches for all of them. And not once does the darkness climb up his arm. Stop for just a second, because if you are seeing what I am seeing, something is starting to bother you in the best possible way. Every single time it runs backward. The uncleanness never climbs into him. The wholeness always pours out. It is not happening once. It is happening every time, like a law underneath the law. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, quiet walks back through the stories most people rush past, do me a favor and subscribe, because this channel lives on it. And while you are here, tell me in the comments which touch so far you would have needed the most. The outcast's, the woman's, or the child's. I read them. Now let me show you the two touches that should have been impossible, because so far he has touched the sick. Next, he touches the dead. There is a man named Jairus, and he is not a beggar or an outcast. He is a ruler of the synagogue. He is the establishment. He is exactly the kind of respectable religious man who is supposed to keep his distance from a controversial traveling teacher. And he comes and falls at Jesus' feet in front of everyone, because respectability stops mattering when your 12-year-old daughter is dying. He begs Jesus to come and lay hands on her. And Jesus goes. But on the way, they are delayed, and the delay is fatal. Messengers arrive with the worst sentence a father can hear. Your daughter is dead. Don't trouble the teacher anymore. It's over. And Jesus keeps walking. He gets to the house, and it is already full of the noise of grief, the wailing, the mourners, the terrible sound of a family coming apart. And he clears the room, and he takes only the parents and 3 of his disciples, and he goes in to where the girl is lying. Now think about what he is about to do. Under the law, a corpse was the most defiling thing you could touch. Not sickness, not disease, death. To touch a dead body made you unclean for 7 days, and it spread to everything you touched after. This was the end of the entire purity system. And he reaches down and takes the dead girl by the hand. And he says 2 words that Mark loved so much he kept them in the original Aramaic. Talitha kumi. And here is what breaks me about that phrase. It is not the language of an exorcism. It is not a grand incantation. It is tender. It is domestic. It is almost exactly what a parent says to a sleeping child on a school morning. Little girl, get up. The words a mother uses to wake her daughter for breakfast, spoken over a corpse. And life runs up his arm and into her. Her eyes open. She stands up. And Mark, in the most beautifully ordinary detail, records that Jesus tells them to give her something to eat. She is not a ghost. She is a hungry 12-year-old. And once again, the defilement that should have flooded into him never arrived. It went the other way. Life for death. Every time. And if you think that is a one-time thing, go to the town of Nain. There is a funeral procession coming out through the gate, and at the front of it is a widow, and they are carrying the body of her only son. Sit with how total that loss is. She had already lost her husband. Now her only son is gone, and in that world, a widow with no man to provide for her was not just heartbroken. She was destitute. She was watching her survival be carried to a grave. That coffin held her child and her future at the same time. And Luke says that when the Lord saw her, that same word comes back. He had compassion on her, the gut-deep churn. And he walks up and he touches the bier, the open funeral frame they carried the body on. And the whole procession stops dead, because you do not touch a funeral bier. That is contact with death itself. And he says, "Young man, I to you arise." And the dead man sits up and begins to speak. And Luke says Jesus gave him back to his mother. Not just raised a body, handed a son back into a mother's arms. Now, here is what most people miss, and it is why the crowds reacted the way they did. To really feel the scandal of this, you have to understand how absolute the exile of the unclean was in that world. The ancient records, the writings of the historian Josephus, the rabbinic laws collected in the Mishnah, describe it in exhaustive detail. The unclean were barred from the temple, barred from the town, cut off from ordinary human contact by an entire architecture of rules. The distance we talked about at the start of this video was not one man's bad luck. It was a system carefully built and rigorously enforced. And there is a quiet, haunting footnote to all of this. The early church historian Eusebius records a tradition that the woman who was healed of the bleeding came from Caesarea Philippi, and that she set up a bronze statue there to commemorate the day she was healed. A monument to the afternoon an untouchable woman touched the hem of a robe and got her life back. Real people, real memory, a statue standing for centuries because of a single touch, which brings us to the strangest healing touch of them all. It happens on the worst night, in the dark, in a garden, at the moment Jesus is being arrested. Soldiers and officials have come for him, and Peter, trying to defend him, draws a sword and swings and cuts off the ear of a servant of the high priest. John gives us his name, Malchus, one of the men who came to drag Jesus away to his death. And in the middle of his own arrest, with his hands about to be bound, Jesus reaches out and touches the ear of his enemy and heals him. Think about that. The last recorded healing touch before the cross is not given to a friend or a follower or a grieving parent. It is given to a man who came in the dark to help kill him. He healed the hand that was reaching to destroy him. And that is the pattern pushed all the way to its edge. It runs backward even here, even for an enemy, even on the night everything falls apart. And then, for the first time in this entire story, the pattern reverses. Because there comes a day when no one heals him. There comes a day when the hands reaching for him are not reaching to be healed, but to nail him down. They take the man whose touch made lepers clean, and they strip him, and they beat him, and they hang him on a piece of wood. And the law he had been quietly running backward this whole time has one more thing to say. The ancient scriptures declared that anyone hung on a tree is under a curse. Cursed, unclean, cut off. Do you see what happened? For 3 years, uncleanness reached for him and he made it clean. And now, on the cross, he does the unthinkable. He stops running the pattern backward. He lets it run forward one final time, straight into himself. He becomes the leper. He becomes the corpse. He becomes the untouchable one, hung outside the city, abandoned, cut off from God and man. All the uncleanness he had refused to absorb for 3 years, he gathers it all and takes it into his own body at once. The clean, finally, deliberately losing, on purpose. And they take him down, and they put him in a tomb, and they roll a stone across the door. And the man whose hand raised the dead is now the dead man behind the stone. But you remember the promise I made you at the start of this video. I told you the last touch in this story would belong to a man who had been dead for 3 days. So let me take you into a locked room 8 days later. The disciples are hiding behind locked doors, terrified, and one of them, Thomas, has been saying something out loud that the others were only thinking. He said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Give him credit for honesty. He would not fake a faith he did not have. He needed to touch it, and Jesus comes and stands among them through the locked door, alive. And he turns to Thomas. And he does not scold him. He does something almost unbelievably gentle. He says, "Reach here with your finger. Put your hand into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Now hold everything you have learned in this video and look at this moment. Here is Jesus, risen, glorified, victorious over death. If ever there were a being who was pure, whole, holy, untouchable in the highest sense, it is the resurrected Christ standing in that room. He is the most clean thing in all of creation. And what does he do with that purity? He opens it. He takes a doubting man's unclean, unbelieving hand, and he guides it into the open wound in his own side. There it is, the open loop, closed. The very first thing you learned today was that when clean touches unclean, the clean always loses. 1,000 years, no exceptions. And here, at the end, the most clean being in existence invites the most unqualified hand directly into his wounds. And the hand does not defile him. The hand lives. The law is not broken. It is finished. He carried it all the way to the cross and out the other side, and now it has no power left to enforce. And notice, please notice that the wounds are still there. He is risen. He is glorified. He could have a perfect, unmarked body, but he kept the scars. He walks out of the grave still carrying the holes in his hands and the wound in his side. Why? Maybe because he wanted us to always have somewhere to put our hands. He kept the evidence of the worst thing that ever happened to him, so that every doubter after Thomas would have a place to reach. Now let me bring this all the way home to you, because there is a reflex every single human being shares. When we see something sick, something contaminated, something dying, we pull our hand back. It is instinct. It is self-protection. We lean away from the hospital bed. We hesitate at the open casket. We kept our distance from the person whose grief is too heavy or whose life is too messy. Everyone knows the pull of that reflex, and everyone also knows the weight of the rare hand that refuses to pull back. The parent who does not flinch from the feverish child. The nurse who holds the hand of a dying stranger so they do not go alone. We recognize that as something close to holy because it is so rare. That is what he did on every page. He never once pulled his hand back. So let me give you the three things to carry out of this. First, the factual one. Go back and check it yourself. In every recorded touch in the Gospels, the leper, the bleeding woman, the fever, the children, the dead girl, the widow's son, the enemy's ear, and finally Thomas, not once does the uncleanness transfer to Jesus. Not one exception. The direction is always the same. Wholeness pours out of him and into whatever it touches. The pattern is perfect. Second, the personal one. If that pattern never once broke for anyone else, then it does not break for you either. There is nothing in you so unclean, so far gone, so contaminated by shame or failure or grief that his touch runs the other way from you. The whole point of every one of these stories is that he does not lose what you think he will lose by reaching for you. And third, the one I want to leave sitting in your chest. He did not heal from a safe distance. He could have. He could have spoken every one of these healings from across the room and never risked a thing. But he reached. Every time he reached. And the risen Christ still carries the wounds that prove he is willing to be touched. So let me ask you, and I really do want your answer down in the comments. Which touch in this video hit you the hardest? Was it the outcast, feeling a human hand for the first time in years? Was it the woman in the crowd, finally seen and called daughter? Or was it Thomas with his fingers inside the scars? Tell me below, and tell me why. We started this video with a man at the edge of a village, forced to call out one word so the whole world would keep its distance. Unclean. And here is the last thing I want you to hold on to. In the hands of Jesus, that word never once got the final say. It didn't for the leper, it didn't for the woman, it didn't for the dead, and it doesn't for you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.